we have some people here who were not able to be at the first session, so that's really great. We're going to start by doing some informal sharing in the first few moments, kind of looking back on the last week. We've been looking at the book and reading the book. Those of us who were able to be together at the first session worked with some of those experiences with the book and the insights in our breakout groups last week. We're going to take just 10 minutes now to kind of see where we are. I wanted to ask to invite us to talk about what resonated with you from session 1, if you were with us then. Or there's another question might be, what big impression did you have from what you read so far in the book? Or another way to look at that would be, was there a question that kept coming to your mind as you worked with the material in this first week? So those are kind of some lead-in teasers to, and we're going to just do this as a whole group rather than break out into 2 smaller groups. We'll do that for a different purpose a little bit later. So as you reflect on the book and what you've been reading, and or the session, or what you experienced about that this last week, who'd like to start? And we'll just do popcorn style. Not everybody's going to be called upon, but just share what might be the overflow for you. Go right ahead, Jean.
What kept occurring to me, I was not at the first session. I had another obligation, but what kept occurring to me as I was reading, and you've drawn it out here in Exploring Chapter 4, it took 3 years to see real transformation. And so I kept wondering, what were the things that were done to keep faith going? Those, I think, might be important tips for us to get out of this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jean. Someone else? Just go right ahead.
Well, we weren't at the first meeting either, Marv. But to me, they always came back to, what would God have us do? Mm-hmm. And it's God leading us and telling us what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carl.
There are so many parallels that can be drawn. I think that it gives us hope for the future.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
I also was struck by the fact that they have a dual pastorate, and you get the benefit of 2 minds and 2 ways of looking at things. It's an unusual situation for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
I thought it was great, especially the first few chapters. I got just so excited because the reference that they had about their church being 112 years old, I really, felt close to it because our church is so old. Mm-hmm. And how they were approaching it, just the building itself even. And so a couple of nights before, I had already looked at some research that, Barb, bless her heart, has done a lot when we were working on the windows. So we learned about some history that I absolutely didn't know about. I was basically born and raised in our buildings, so I'm very, very close to it. And then going on to the next chapters, I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's how you are attached to a building. Mm-hmm. And what you need to do. And I just think they were very encouraging. I underline and I go, this person in our church needs to read this. That's just exactly how it felt. Well, I'm just going to, read this book. I'll talk to you next week. So I was all excited.
That sounds like one of those.
I liked her line when she said, we took the DNA of our 112-year-old church mm-hmm. and transplanted it into today. Mm-hmm. So that it could grow today. And that's what made me think of what you just shared.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone else? Time for 1 or 2 more.
I really appreciated that in the beginning, the leadership that found these pastors, when they chose to ask these pastors to come, and then they said, you know, if we come, then we're definitely going to be moving. I like the fact that the leadership chose to be in that conversation from the very beginning. And then the people of the congregation, for the most part, of course, you know, stayed in the conversation, and didn't just totally bail or anything. That's a
You
really
wonder-
solid but healthy.
You wonder what
community.
would have happened if they had not said, if you call us, you have to change.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
I was struck with the section that talked about how working through a process that was good with the congregation did not give them direction. That
Mhm.
it didn't answer the questions, it didn't tell them what to do next. And then the idea that they could not wait to achieve consensus or ever expect to achieve a full consensus. And that consideration then of how one or two people can hold things up and all of that, and how some people's votes or opinions are elevated above others, and those kinds of things I think are just really helpful when you're really in the midst of trying to move forward and make some changes. That there's probably never a point where everyone is fully going to agree. And if you wait for that, you don't get anywhere. So
Thank you, Cynthia. One more?
I just want to echo what both Mary and Cynthia said, that first of all, the search and call committee was very, you know, it was made clear to the church by the pastors that if you call us, this is what is the expectation. So there was no bait and switch, you know, they knew what they were getting into, even though it took some time. So that was always there. But then also, as Cynthia mentioned, it took one person to say, okay, it's been 2 or 3 years or however long it was, and this is why we called them. What are we waiting for? And sometimes it takes that one voice, and that whole idea of consensus, as much as we love to hold that up as a beautiful ideal, sometimes you just need to move on, and you can't hold that the tyranny of the one, as we're actually seeing in our politics play out in
Yes,
Congress.
yes.
I won't belabor that, but
Mhm.
as a clergy person, I really appreciated that sometimes there needs to be an awareness from the laity of how we move forward, and consensus is not always it.
Yeah, powerful team approach developed, and yeah, thanks, Miriam. Well, what I'm going to do is we'll put Rochelle's sharing time at the very end as kind of a send-off, and we'll just go ahead and move with the rest of the design. I hope you all got the revised schedule. We have not developed this before, and so we found that there were some problems with the draft that I had created and that we'd worked on for today. So if you got the last night's mailing, you got the last one then. Bill is going to divide us into how many groups, Bill?
We're gonna actually have 3 rooms.
Okay, Rochelle and I and Bill will not be in the groups this time. And quickly, will you select either a volunteer or a gerrymander somebody to be the person who will guide you? Because in the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to look at chapter 4. And we're going to review the summary of the chapter, and hopefully everybody's gotten into it. We don't want to take time to read all that or read all the Luke passage. They're there to remind us what's there. The most important part in the breakout is the reflection questions as we respond to each other and we go wherever that leads us. So give your name and the church you're from, and then take just a few seconds and quickly get somebody to be your leader. And then Bill will call us back at about 10:25, and we'll just share randomly there from the first group. And then we'll go back and do chapter 5 and 6 together at the latter part of the session. Okay? Are we ready to divide, Bill?
Yep.
All right. Have some fruitful discussion, and be sure you pick somebody quickly to sort of guide you so that you get through what is there in the 15 minutes.
go to your rooms.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had some good sharing in your group. What we're going to do now for just 10 minutes is kind of sort of hear from each group, hopefully a little bit about what you were talking about or what stood out. Chapter 4, titled Fearless, focuses a great deal on the issue of change and resistance to change and the powerful dynamic of moving ahead when there is a consensus and a process developed. So that's kind of the overarching theme for 4. And we're going to just share a little bit about that. And then we're going to get back into the same group and do chapter 5 and 6. So let me stop talking, and either the person who was selected in your group or someone from your group, would you like to share? And I don't care. It doesn't matter who's first. Just don't waste a lot of time waiting around.
We were in group 3, and we started talking about it took 3 years for transformation to really take hold in their church and Connection Church. And so, you know, some of us are still hoping to see that transformation begin. Part of that process is to shed the people-pleasing dimension of ministry. Then we talked a bit about the pastor versus parishioners, and talk some about how they as pastors took the lead as they, you know, told them early on that they were going to do that. And then we moved into COVID and talked about, Miriam and I especially began in 2020, and so we've seen this a delay in building relationships and trust because of COVID. So this 3-year transformation time frame is probably extended for us anyway. And then we ended up talking about emotional energy and how that can get displaced.
Okay,
So that kind of
thanks, Mitch.
sums up. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's hear from group number 1 then. Somebody?
Let's see, that would be us.
Okay.
The most prominent impression I have is of the desire to not lose anybody along the way. And that was shared around the whole group, and we'll be dealing with those issues as we go along, I'm sure. My personal experience with All Pilgrims was 20 years ago when the 2 congregations came together to become All Pilgrims. We did lose a few people. And despite everything we did to try not to lose them, we did. And we mourned that and moved ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Group number 2. Okay, is there another group? Do we have 4 groups, Bill, or 3?
No, there were 3 groups.
Okay. All right. So we're going to now move to back to the groups, and 5 and 6 is a bigger chunk of.
Mary wants to say something.
Okay, Mary, excuse me.
Mary's muted.
You're muted.
I forgot
There
our
you
number. I forgot our group number.
Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Okay, a few things that that we talked about, that key leaders stepped up to make decisions. They were very communicative with each other and with the congregation about every step of the process, and the idea of the dual pastors and the benefit, such as if different people in the congregation identified with a specific pastor more than the other, but still were able to like bring them together and be united and share different perspectives. And also, I'd like to mention that when the family visited the church that had intended to visit the Baptist church and stated bluntly that this church is dead. And sometimes maybe you need to say that, and that can start some engagement and conversation.
Thank you, Mary. And the way Don writes the book, having the lay people have paragraphs in the book about their perspective, strengthens what you said about the lay and clergy leadership. I thought that was a unique way to do that as she wrote the book. All right, take a deep breath. Ooh, okay, we're going to move now to groups again, and we're going to do chapter 5 and 6 again. Summary of the chapter is there, the passage of scripture that she has selected and how that applies to the themes, and then the reflection questions. And Bill will bring us back together shortly after 11 o'clock, and we'll do some more sharing, and then we have a video to look at and some other things to do as we close. Send us off, Bill, please. Okay, welcome back, everybody. The final 25 minutes of our session today, we're going to do 20 minutes of sharing from this last breakout group. And we have a 5-minute video about their process and changing their name. And then Rochelle is here. She was on an emergency call about hospice with one of her family members in Texas. And she's going to close us at 11:25. And then she has an announcement about our guest, the author, joining us. So get settled in our new arrangement here. I think we can see everyone, and let's hear from group number 2. What's important to share with the rest of us? Group number 2. Okay, Mary, you're muted. Let's everybody unmute, and then unless we cough or something, we'll get a problem there. Okay, Mary.
Couple of points. We liked how it was discussed that, the concept of waiting on the Lord, and then also making room for the congregation to be surprised, to ask them to make room for them to be surprised, and also for the pastors in that process, where maybe after they've had some hard conversations, that the pastors can still make room to be surprised in what is happening as well. Change fatigue and being vulnerable with the congregation as a pastor. You have some of the same worries and fears and struggles in day-to-day life, and also in this transition process, and how that creates a bond and less of a pedestal hierarchy type relationship. And then just mentioned that it was interesting that they stayed true to their DNA by reconnecting with their past, but letting that past help them to rediscover who they wanted to be in the future.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that group that a member might want to share? It's interesting how they carried forth some of the traditions that had been important in the past. the spaghetti feet, for example.
Yeah.
It was interesting that what would you carry forward from your current past into a new future? That was just really interesting. Anything else from anybody in group 2? Don't want to stop somebody that wants to share something. Okay, let's go to group number 3.
Well, we talked to, I just give you some highlights here. Talked about the outsiders who thought they were going to the Baptist church, but actually they ended up in Connection, and they said that it was a little rude, but sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to help create change. You have to die to resurrect. We talked about that. In chapters 5 and 6, they decided that they wanted to interact with the community, and that led them to the right building. So then we got into changing the big changes of the location and to change the name. And we decided that they decided to change their name last. That was after the nonprofits were part of the church and so forth. And so Connection became their name. The foundational importance of the mindset to experiment, and that prayer is foundational to transformation, and the importance of the congregation wanting to resurrect. And we talked about the age of some of our people, but still some very old people in the churches have a lot of energy. So not to deny that. And we talked a bit about reestablishing roots, to know where you want to go, what kind of church you want to be, and some about miracles, and that the miracles indicate God's presence. So those are just some highlights.
All right, thanks, Mitch. Are there other comments from that group? I thought it was interesting that they identified that the leases with the nonprofits underwrite 3/4 of their property costs, including staff. So that's a very significant piece when so many of our congregations are struggling with adequate financial resources.
And yet it was a bargain for the nonprofits too, because they
Yes.
didn't have to pay market value.
That's an important point, because they rented at less than market value. Yeah. Any other comment about that bubbles up? Well, let's hear from group number 1.
Well, we talked a lot about change. There were those who find change difficult or challenging, and those who are energized by change. We talked about, or I added that actually, if there is no change, there is no life. Life requires change. And we talked about how that is reflected in how our relationship to God and Jesus may change over time. I didn't take a lot of notes. Did anyone else want to share something from our group?
Well, Matt said that change is the spice of life, and he likened it to flowing water or moving air, that if you don't have those conditions, what you end up with is stagnation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all of that is so radical now because change is happening so fast. When I think about when I started the ministry in 1957, change was not nearly as rapid as it is now. It's just a whirlwind with change, the culture, technology,
Mhm.
theology.
Matt wasn't even a twinkle in his daddy eye in 1957, were you, Matt?
My dad wasn't even a twinkle.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Donna gave us a good recipe for dealing with change. She said, you just relax and do what you have to do.
Interesting.
I wish it were that easy.
But there is a kind of a resting into it with that statement that and rather than resisting it or fighting it, isn't there?
Right.
I'm wondering if I could ask, if you don't mind, Marvin, if I can ask Gloria to comment, because she's really in the midst of it right now. And she's shaking her head like, no, I don't want to talk.
No, I need you to repeat the question. I got distracted for a second.
Yeah, and this discussion, you are really in the midst of it right now. You and Barb and I'm sorry,
Jane.
Jane. Yeah, sorry, Jane. Are really, you're in the midst of it right now and in what's going on. And I'm just wondering how this is resonating with you three.
Well, I will say from my perspective, a lot of the we're encountering a lot of the things that they talk about, like the fear, and the people who haven't been actively involved with the church, suddenly having an opinion. And in some cases that's being handled really well. Like we had one of our elders express to their children who haven't been coming to the church that they really have no say. I mean, in a nice way, it was much nicer than that, but it was the idea that because the children were concerned about, what we're potentially doing with the building and they were nicely told that, like, if you'd been involved over the years, you could say something, but really, like, you have no attachment to it anymore. What you're talking about is sentimentality from way back, right? But we are encountering fear in a little bit different from some longtime members who haven't been actively involved until really recent again. And so that fear is unfortunately showing its head in some ugly ways. And it's hard to watch that because you just start to get like where you think, okay, like we're just settling in a little bit, we're just starting to get comfortable, and then something pops up.
Boom. Yeah.
And then everybody's like anxious again, and it's that panic, and it's like, whoa, time out, folks. Like it's communication becomes so essential because we tend to, like, when we're anxious, we'll ask everybody for their opinion, and then it just spins it higher instead of having like one source or a group that is on the same page that's your go-to for the answers for questions that you have. Instead it gets, we tend to like triangulate and more than triangle, right? But every point we can, we're like, what about this? What about that? And it's like, depending who you ask, you might get a different answer. And so we're really trying to minimize that now, because we know that if I can go to 5 different people and get 5 different answers, I'm just going to spin. And so it's really, that communication becomes so essential. But taking a breath is really important, and we've been reminded of that. So I don't know, Barb and Jane have another perspective to offer.
Well, just that non-anxious presence. I mean, when that came up today, it's just like, yes, we have Gloria, and she is really good at modeling that non-anxious presence and wonder, and rather than jumping on something, just wonder, okay, now I need to think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a key point. I think that's what Don and Joe were for the Odessa church. They were, even though they were anxious, they didn't communicate that anxiousness to the congregation. They communicated the solid center. Yeah.
It's very hard not having, I mean, we're so fortunate to have Gloria, and we've gone through things I didn't even see. And being, like you say, anxious, I'm just another gal that I grew up with in the church. It's just like, how many times can you get your heart really broken? I mean, you get that, oh my gosh, I'm broken. My heart is broken about this whole thing. And then another thing that I always have found getting older is never assume. Like never assume somebody's attitude, latitude. Always try to keep it in a uprising, resurrected, as we say. That's the word today for me. So, yeah, I can't have my heart broken anymore. But God also tells me, and Jesus showed me, you're going to have your heart broken. Now, how are you going to get through it?
Well, thank you for sharing this kind of case study for us, because it really does illustrate many of the threads that Don has talked about. The tyranny of the minority, the non-attenders who haven't been or given for 30 years, but who come back and want to vote to save the church. The threads that you're talking about in terms of the heartbreak, and there's certainly some scripture that would speak to how God's heart is broken by the kinds of things that we as the human family do to one another. And so there is a real spiritual dimension to that. I appreciate that very much.
One of the things I like to think about is kintsugi, which is that art of taking broken pottery and putting it back together with gold. Because that's the vision that I have, like, of Jesus doing for us and God doing for us, is that God breaks us open so that we can become something better.
That's a great image. That
And
really
keeping that, trying to hold on to that yes, our hearts are breaking, but they're not just breaking and being left in pieces. They're breaking open so that we can become something different.
Yeah.
And something ideally better,
And
or
unfortunately,
more in line with God's vision.
the breakage is necessary first in order to be put back together. Yeah.
That's the hope of the conflict. Yeah. Anything else that someone wants to share? We have just a few more minutes.
I'll just make one comment about the pastors in this book. And one of the things I really appreciate about them is, while they're the non-anxious presence, they're still willing to be vulnerable and share that, yeah, they were like tired of change. They were, it was fatigue. So they're acknowledging, and I said this in our little group, but they're acknowledging their humanity. And what I find is that we often want to put our leadership, whether it's pastors or it's lay leadership, elders, whatever the case may be, we want to put them on a pedestal. And the danger of that is that when you put someone on a pedestal, you also create a pit in front of them. So when they fall, don't just fall back to ground zero, they fall below that.
Mhm.
And so I think by being vulnerable and being transparent and open, it allows us all to stay relatively on the same level, because we truly are, we're in this together.
Yeah. All right, now Bill has put up for us excuse me, that was an abrupt ending, but we're going to move to the video. It's about 5 minutes long, and Bill, go ahead and run it for us, and click on the audio as well. This is the church's video that they shared with the congregation.
Good.
Witness to this community. The scripture Isaiah 43:1 offers us assurance and guidance through this process. The Lord says, "Do not fear, I have called you by name, you are mine." Why would we consider a new name at this time in our church's 111-year history? Well, it is a faithful time to ask the question as we relocate to a new mission center at 4241 Tanglewood. If we're there for 5 years and decide to change our name, we've missed the opportunity to take the steps needed at the right time to be as accessible and attractive to our community as possible. 980 new Disciples of Christ churches have been formed in the last almost 20 years, and none have been named first. This lets us know that naming churches First Christian or First Baptist or First Methodist was a time in the frontier over 100 years ago. We're in a new era of church naming now. We are one of 9 churches named first in Odessa. A more unique name would help us be more distinctive and easier for people to know what church we are. We want to take every opportunity we can, especially at this juncture in our church's history, to be effective in reaching our community for Jesus Christ. It might be helpful to look why other churches change. Church consultant Tom Rainier in 2014 researched why churches have changed their names in the last 10 years. A couple of reasons are to create a new or a clearer priority for the church, to change a geographical distinction. If a church relocates, or if it was called City Center Church but is no longer the city center, to identify with the community more, to avoid confusion with another church with a similar name, and to relaunch, to begin again with a fresh start and new invitation to the community to come to know the love of God through that church. A couple of criteria for picking a new name. These are important because there are a lot of choices, and so these help us narrow down wisely. The name needs to be unique. No one else in Odessa, ideally, would have the name. The name needs to be accessible. The average person, particularly unchurched person, needs to know what it means and not have to use a dictionary to figure it out. It needs to be genuine, to truly express what we are about. It needs to be intergenerational and appeal across age groups. A conversation starter, something that makes people curious to want to know more about who we are and what we represent. And inspirational, a name that lifts up the gospel and people in our community. That's a lot. That's why we're praying about what this new name might be. The team that's putting this together, this conversation for our church, has been meeting for over 18 months. Renee Earls is our chair, and we have looked through so many names. This is just to give you a little sampling. We've looked at Anthem Church, Bread of Life Church, Centerpoint Christian, Covenant Christian, Desert Way Christian, Encounter Church, Epic Church, Freedom Christian, Hope Fellowship, Liberty Christian, Mission First Christian, Pipeline Christian, Radiance Christian, Redemption Church, The Church on the Corner, Woodbrook Christian Church. Over time, some favorites have continued to bubble up, and we share those with you. Celebration Christian Church, Liberty Christian Church, Dayspring Christian Church, Table of Grace Christian Church, Connection Christian Church, Pathway Christian Church, Disciples Christian Church, and Welcome Table Christian Church.
Okay, it reminds me of what Don wrote in the book, quoting Rick Morris, who most of us know. A new name won't guarantee a new future, but the old name will block it. We're going to move now to our closing 5 minutes with Rochelle and her announcement about the author coming to be with us. And Rochelle, we'll follow you at this point.
All right. So Dawn Darwin Weeks is going to join us on our meeting on September 27th, and we'll have her for approximately an hour. And she's going to be looking for questions from us. So you can be thinking about that. And then we are looking to add that 5th session on it would be the first Wednesday in October, October 4th, to have some time to come back after meeting with her and to do the last four chapters of the book together. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing there. And so I wanted to start our time together with Marvin had asked me to do a breath kind of prayer, but we can end and be sent out that way, surely. We have started during COVID, with a virus that is making it hard for people to breathe. I was doing hospital chaplaincy at that time as well, just real part-time. It just felt like breathing was something that we needed to do during a time of transition and change, and so much happening in our society and in our churches. And transformation and change is painful, difficult, and inevitable. So whether we seek it out through processes and conversations in our church, or we just live it because it's happening around us, it is something that we all go through. So we started breathing at the beginning of our church service, and we just continued doing that. And it's a way to pause for a moment and center your spirit and your body, because we kind of don't think about those two together all the time. And so what I always say to my folks is that we walk around breathing shallow, and that's natural. That's kind of, we breathe in this little box. And so when we think about taking deep breaths, and so many of you probably do this and know this already, you really want to think about filling your lungs up as much as you are able to do that. So from our breath actually initiates closer to where our belly button is. So from the bottom up, filling your lungs up, hold the breath at the top for a second, and then you let that air out. We know that God is spirit and breath. And so this is a really nice way to draw the breath into our body, to think about drawing the spirit into our body and calming and focusing ourselves. So we're going to do that as we go forward. We're going to take 3 breaths, but I also want to incorporate a breath prayer. And so I'm going to kind of direct you to take a breath in. And as you do, I'm going to say some words that are really familiar. And I think this is important when we talk about transformation and the things happening in our lives, in our churches. We sometimes feel really alone, like we're the only ones going through this, or nobody, you can understand. But really, it's nothing new. The church, through time, has gone through change. We all go through change. We're not alone in this. And so the words of scripture that are so familiar can be so life-giving. And so as I direct you to breathe, I'm going to read some words on your breath in and your breath out that are going to sound very familiar, ancient words that I hope will breathe a little life and spirit into you as we prepare to end our time together and walk into our lives. So for a minute, just settle your body, whatever that takes for you, and kind of let that air out. And as you draw in a deep breath, hear these words: the Lord is my shepherd. And exhale, I shall not want. And inhale, the Lord is my shepherd. And exhale, I shall not want. And inhale, the Lord is my shepherd. And exhale, I shall not want. So may the Spirit of the Lord go with you all into your day. Is there anything else, Marvin, or Bill, that we need to share? Or is that?
I don't think so. We'll send the information out for session 3, hopefully before the end of the week.
All right.
Peace
be with you.
Thank you all.
Thank
you for making this possible.
Oh, that was fun.